All right, welcome everybody to this second of two 2020 CoCoRaHS winter precipitation trainings. My name is Hans Schmitz. I'm the Extension Director for Purdue Extension in Posey County. I will be handling some of the logistics for you today before I turn it over to Beth Hall, who will then introduce our National Weather Service speakers. What you need to know. What you need to know today is that we don't have a chat feature enabled. If you have anything you need to communicate with us, please use the question and answer box. We will deal with all communication through the question and answer platform, and we'll get to audio issues here in a moment. So my fellow speakers that can hear, we will get to Pat's question in just a minute. Outside of that, we will answer questions at multiple times throughout the presentation. Andrew has built in multiple breaks to kind of answer any questions that might pop up. So as you think of them, type them in. This is being recorded, and the recording will be edited and then shared. It will take about 3 to 5 days to get everything put together, so there will be a recording made available in the future. It just won't be right away. And with that, I think I have the basics covered, so I'll turn it over to our Indiana State climatologist, Beth Hall.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth. You probably have been receiving newsletters from me and monthly reminders to look back over your previous month's data to make sure they're complete. I am going to introduce you now to Andrew White, who will be giving the presentation on winter precipitation. We decided to offer this special training because there is a bit more involved, and Andrew will show you all the different fields now that you can start thinking about for the winter. So Andrew, you want to take it from here?
Well, thank you very much, Hans and Beth. Again, my name is Andrew White. I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Indianapolis, and I am also one of your state coordinators for Indiana CoCoRaHS, along with Beth Hall, and then we have also Casey Hoover from my office here in Indianapolis, and then Kyle Brown, who's up in the Northern Indiana office. We'll have all of our contact information at the end of the presentation if you want to chat with us about anything. But other than that, we'll go ahead and get this started. So just really quick, I want to do an outline of what we're expecting to talk about today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is I'm going to introduce what is CoCoRaHS. If there's any of you out here that are listening to this presentation that aren't familiar with the program and are not currently members of the program, we'll just do a quick slide talking about what it is, what it stands for, and how to be involved. After that, we'll be diving right into snow measurement. For many of you who've joined here in the last year, you go out there and you check your rain gauge every morning and you look at the number in the gauge and you put it in. Fortunate thing with that is that with winter precipitation, things get a little more complicated and you got a few more things you have to look at. So we'll go into detail about all those different things and all the different caveats to winter measurement. Once we've gotten that winter measurement, then we're going to talk about how to actually enter it into the website, or for those of you that use the mobile app, we'll have an example showing how you would enter all of the different data fields in the mobile app. Then we're going to talk a little bit about ice. So ice gets a little kind of another caveat to things. Ice can get a little difficult and sometimes confusing to answer, so we'll answer some questions with that. And then the last section is just going to be kind of going over some basic things that people have questions about often over the winter. We've kind of compiled a list of things that typically trip people up the most, so we can hopefully catch them before they slip you up. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and talk about what is CoCoRaHS. So if any of you out there have ever wondered what CoCoRaHS actually stands for, it actually stands for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. So those capital letters kind of coming from those different words. But essentially what the CoCoRaHS program is it's a group of trained observers that have these same tools and gauges to have a consistent report, and they go out there and they measure their precipitation, hail, and snow once a day, typically between about 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. But we do have some observers that observe outside that normal time frame, but again, most of them in that time frame. And then they go to either their website, www.CoCoRaHS.org, and publish their data, or they send it in via their mobile app. This data is then used by the National Weather Service. It's used by all sorts of different agencies, Army Corps of Engineers. They have a website on CoCoRaHS that talks about all the different users of CoCoRaHS data to then make decisions about what's going on with the world around us. So if you're not currently a member of CoCoRaHS, we'd highly recommend you reach out to anybody on the team here, and we'd be glad to get you signed up and give you some more information about what the program is and how you can join. But we'd love to see, more observers all over central Indiana, northern Indiana, southern Indiana, all over, just to kind of, again, increase the density of our network across the state. So now we're going to dive right into how to do snow measurement. Again, snow measuring is not quite as easy, and it's a little bit more complicated than your rainfall measurement. So we're going to go into detail and hopefully answer some of the questions you have about snow measurement. I'll take a break once we get through this section of snow measurement to answer any questions that may pop up. But again, if you have any questions, use that chat box to put them in, and then we'll get them all answered as we go along through this presentation. So like I was saying before, snowfall is typically a little bit more difficult to measure than rainfall. It's not just going out there, checking the number on the gauge and putting it in. You've got to melt the snowfall, you've got to measure the snowfall on the gauge, you've got to measure the snowfall on the ground. So again, we'll go through all this in detail, but we want to know that those snow measurements are really important to us. Figuring out exactly how much snowfall is good for us, the National Weather Service, as we look back on events to figure out, how well did we perform when it came to our forecast. If we forecasted 6 inches of snow, we want to know if 6 inches of snow fell or 8 inches or 4 inches, so then we can provide a better service going forward. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, what do you need to measure snow? Well, hopefully the first thing you already have your CoCoRaHS observer. That's your standard 4-inch diameter rain gauge. The thing with the winter precipitation, though, is we're not going to be using that inner gauge and funnel as much as we're going to be using just that outer gauge. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's important later. But for right now, you just need to know that that 4-inch diameter rain gauge is going to be your main tool for measuring the next thing that you may or may not have is a snow measuring board or some way of measuring the board or measuring the snow. Our recommendation is some sort of plywood, whether it's 16-inch by 16-inch like we have here, or some other size of plywood or some other piece of wood, anything along those lines that essentially is just a flat measuring surface that's painted white. Again, the painted white aspect is not required, but what it does help is with any melting that may happen after your snow falls. Generally, that whiter color is going to help limit that melting. So again, ideally something along the lines of a 16 by inch piece of plywood painted white, but do the best you can based on what you have. The next thing is a ruler or yardstick to actually measure the snowfall. One caveat is ideally if you had a ruler that measures in tenths of an inch versus the standard home ruler that you have that measures in eighths of an inch, you're going to get snowfall measurement. Now, obviously, I know a lot of people don't have that snow stick that measures, or yardstick that measures to the tenths of an inch, but if you can get one, that's ideal. If not, there's nothing that says you can't continue to use the normal ruler you have at home. If you're looking for some of these things like the snow ruler or snow boards or that kind of thing, the same websites you got your CoCoRaHS rain gauge from, you'll also be able to get some of these other tools. The next one is you need something essentially to pat down the snow that can collect on your rain gauge. So we're going to have some examples of what that looks like in a bit, but there is a official CoCoRaHS snow swatter that you can see pictured there in front of you. You can use that, or if you have just some kind of spatula or something like that at home, that can also work well. Again, we'll talk about what all these tools are used for, but right now, just for your general reference, that it's going to be something that will help you out. Now that we've got all the tools that we need to measure, now we need to know where to put those tools. So you can see in the picture on the right, we have our example of what our rain gauge looks like. And then we have that snowboard that we mentioned out there right next to it. Board, generally, you're going to be wanting to put it in a similar place to where you put your rain gauge. You want it somewhere that's away from a building, so you're not going to have any snow that's falling off the building or being blocked by the building. You probably wouldn't want to put it somewhere like on your patio, where again you're going to be blocked by either trees or the your house itself. You want to put it somewhere that's open. But one thing you also have to think about is any potential drifting. So sometimes it can kind of difficult to find that perfect spot for the snow, because sometimes those open areas, then you end up getting a lot of wind that can blow the snow around the snowboard. So again, measuring snowfall, it's not an exact science, but we just ask that you do your best. Try and find the most representative spot to measure your snowfall. One other thing to think about is you have a white snowboard that's out there in the middle of your yard. You put it. Once it snows, sometimes it's been kind of hard to find it because it's going to either be buried by the snow or it'll blend in pretty good. So having something to measure where that snowfall is, whether it's one of those orange flags or an American flag or some kind of stick sticking out of the ground, some way to know actually where your snowboard is probably a good idea. And again, like I was mentioning before, with that funnel and the inner rain gauge, you don't really want to have that in if you're expecting snowfall, because the snow will fall and then it's going to collect in the funnel and it's not going to be able to squeeze through that tiny hole that goes into the inner gauge. So you want to make sure you pull that out. Another thing to note is if you do end up having a mixture of rain and snow and then temperatures drop below freezing, the act of freezing from that water in your inner tube, so the small tube inside, can often crack or break that inner tube. So a lot of people will typically take that inner tube out for the season and then they'll put it back in when we expect temperatures to go back above freezing. That's again, your decision. You can either have that inner tube out the whole season, or you can put it in and take it out depending on what the weather is. Now we're actually going to talk about how to go out there and take those different measurements of snow. So once the snow's fallen, we've gotten everything set up right with our equipment. Now how do we actually go out there and measure the snow accurately? Well, there are 4 types of snow measurements, and we're going to go through each one of these individually. I'm going to explain exactly what they are and where they go on the CoCoRaHS webpage. But the first measurement is the total depth of new snow, or the new snowfall. So this is your 24-hour snowfall that's fallen, since the last time you measured. Then the second one is the liquid equivalent of that new snow. So of the snow that just fell in the last 24 hours, what is the water amount of that snow? Then the third measurement is the total depth of new and old snow. So the combination of snow that fell in the last 24 hours, plus the amount of snowfall that was already on the ground since that last report you made. And then the fourth one is the water equivalency of that total snow on the ground. So we'll talk about that first one, the depth of new snowfall, and then we'll dive into the other ones after that. So when it comes to measuring the depth of your new snowfall, one of the things you're going to be using is that snowboard that you put out. So one thing we want to, as a caveat, is you don't go out there to your rain gauge and measure your snow depth from your actual rain gauge. Again, that's why we have that snowboard that has all of the, on the ground, because it's going to have a better catch, essentially, or better, more accurate measurement than what's actually going to fall in your rain gauge. You can see right there, again, you don't measure from the rain gauge, you'll measure from the snowfall on the ground. One other thing that's important to know is this time of the year with the snowfall, you're not necessarily always going to measure your snowfall the same time that you measure your amount of liquid in your rain gauge. So as you know, for all of the, weather recording you've done so far this year, you go out there at 7 a.m. or whatever time you normally do it, and then you measure your rainfall. Well, with snow, as you're going to see right here, this maybe not be the best way to figure out exactly how much snow fell if you wait all the way until the next morning to measure the snow. So you can see in the example here that we have a snow event. We have Monday at 7 a.m. It starts to snow, and then by the afternoon or so, it's when it stops to snow. So, about 1 o'clock, it stops snowing, and then it's sunny after that. But you can see the amount of snow in that graph right here that it goes up and up and up, and then it starts to go down, and then it flatlines. So when you have a snow event and the snow stops, shortly after it stops snowing, then you're going to start seeing what we call compacting and melting of the snow. So if there's any sunshine, that can start to melt the surface of the snow. And then over time, the snow that's on the ground is going to slowly start to compact together, and you'll see less snow. Ideally, we'd always like to measure the snow immediately after the snow ends. And sometimes that can be hard to guess because sometimes you have the snow, it happens, and then it stops, and then it starts again later. We'll talk about some of the different nuances of that later, but essentially what you just need to know is ideally, if you can measure your snowfall immediately after the snow stops, then that's a great thing, but you're not going to go ahead and put it in to the measurement yet. You'll wait until tomorrow, the next morning with your normal observation time to enter it. But again, we'll have an example of, well, if you do have a big snowfall, how you can actually get that information to us beforehand. So again, just to quickly sum this up, ideally, if you can measure your snowfall right after it stops snowing, but if you can't, whenever you can. Essentially, it's, do the best you can when it comes to snowfall measurements, because again, like I'm going to say several times, snow measuring is not easy, so we just ask you to do the best you can, and you can always use that comment section in your report to tell us what time you actually measured the snowfall. So now that we know when to measure it, now we need to know where to measure it. Again, hopefully we have our snowboard that's set up. So our snowboard's right out there, we go out and we measure on the snowboard. What you're going to do is you're going to take that ruler that you have, either that ruler that's the 1/10 of an inch or the 1/8 of an inch, and you're going to set it onto that snowboard until it's flat on the board. You can usually hear the wood board. With snowfall, we don't read to the nearest 100th of an inch, just because it'd be too difficult to be able to measure that to that detail. But snowfall, the new snowfall, we measure to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. So again, that's why those tenths are important. You'd measure to, like you said in the example here, 3.4 inches. Now, once you've measured the snowfall on your snowboard, then you're going to go ahead and clear the board, assuming you're not going to take a snow core, which we'll talk about later. Like I was saying before, you want to go out and measure your snowfall in an area that's going to be the most representative for the snow that fell. So under a tree is probably not going to be the best spot, because you can imagine the snow that falls is going to catch on the tree, and then you're going to have less on the ground. So again, in the example here, only 3 inches of snow was measured under the tree, but you move out into the open, it was closer to 6.5 inches. So if you don't have a snowboard, then you can go and take multiple measurements and average them out or something like that. But again, you just do the best you can and try and get the most accurate snow measurement that you can come up with. Another thing you have to worry about is when you're looking at the amount of snow that fell, you want to get a little bit closer to ground to see the actual measurement. If you've ever, been cooking and you try to measure how much water is in like a measuring cup, it's very similar. If you don't look at it at eye level, you can get a different measurement than if you looked at it, if you looked at it from above, like you can see here in the example. So to get the best measurement, again, you get as close to horizontal as you can, essentially, of that measurement. And like I was saying before, once you've measured the snowfall, if you're going to do the snow core and do that, otherwise you just would, and you want to set it on top of the total of the snow that's out there right now. And the reason we do that is if you have any wind, you can imagine that some of the snow would blow back onto the snowboard, and you may the next morning think that it was new snowfall when it was actually just snow that kind of blew over from the pile onto that snowboard. So now we've actually gone through and we've measured the depth of our total new snow. Now we go to our web page, our reporting page, and the arrow right there in the yellow underlining shows exactly where you're going to put that in. So that new snowfall that you just measured on your snowboard, that would go in that new snowfall where it says 6.5 inches. So again, accumulation of new snow in inches to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. Now we're going to move on to the next one. So the liquid equivalent of the new snow. So this is, again, the amount of water that was in that new snow that we just measured. So this is where our rain gauge comes into play. So we're going to measure the total snow water content of what fell in the gauge. So remember how I was talking about that snow swatter earlier and what to do? So you can see in this picture, a lot of the times when we have snow events, water will, the snow will build up on the side of the rain gauge, and like a lot of people kind of wonder, well, what do we do with the snow that's not in the rain gauge and it's actually, sitting on top of it? Well, that's where we take our snow swatter, as you can see pictured right there, And what you do is you just, pretty simple, you just kind of push it down, and whatever falls in the gauge, we count, and whatever falls out doesn't count. So again, this is imperfect, but the idea is if everyone's doing it the same way, then at least we're having a consistent way of measuring, we get a consistent measurement. So now what do we do with the snow that's in the rain gauge, or that is collected in our 4-inch rain gauge? A couple different ways of melting that snowfall. The first way of measuring it is you just bring it inside and sit it on your counter for a few hours. Now again, this process can take a while. It's going to take a while for snow to melt even at room temperature. So sometimes that can take, especially if you have more than a few inches of snow, that can take 2 to 3 hours. And a lot of people, if they're measuring in the morning, they don't have that kind of time. You can't sit there and wait several hours for it because you've got to go to work, you've got to go to school, you've got something going on. So one way to quickly melt the snow that's in there and still get a measurement is to add warm water to our snow. So these next couple slides are going to kind of walk you through on how you would go about doing that. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to add some warm water to your inner cylinder. The key importance is you know exactly how much you measure or how much you're putting in, because that's going to matter at the end. So for 0.5 inches of rain, or of the warm water. You want to make sure you write that down and remember it. So now you take that 0.5 inches of warm water, and you're going to pour it into your 4-inch cylinder, which has all the snow. And then you're going to wait for things to completely melt. And if it doesn't completely melt, you might have to get some more water. Again, you just want to remember exactly how much you're putting in there. Now you're going to come back from your 4 inches, you're going to remeasure the total amount of water that was in the 4-inch rain gauge. And again, like it is when you have rain events that are over an inch, you want to be very careful when you're pouring from your 4-inch back into your 1-inch rain gauge with the funnel, that you're not spilling any water, because obviously every drop counts. That's kind of one of the key phrases of CoCoRaHS. So something you can do is you can put a little pan under you just in case you make a spill, you spill a little bit, just to make sure you capture that spillage if it does occur. Now our total amount of rain that we measured, and we subtract what we added to give our final reading of how much was the liquid equivalent of the snow. So again, in the example we just talked about, we had 0.79 inches of rain, and then we added 0.5 inches. So we do a little bit of math, and then we get our final reading of 0.29. So what that number means essentially is the amount of rain, or the amount of liquid equivalent of the snow, was 0.29 inches. Now, a lot of people get a little bit confused by when people are talking about like the 10-to-1 ratio of snow. So what some people will do is, rather than going out and actually measuring their snow, they will just take whatever liquid they have and they'll multiply it by 10. And again, we just want to reiterate that that is not the best way of doing things, because there is often a large range of what that snow ratio can be, whether that is 8 inches of rain or 8 inches of snow from 1 inch of rain, or sometimes up to 20 inches of snow from 1 inch of rain. So again, there's a wide-ranging difference on what those snow to liquid water ratios would be. So again, we don't want you to just take your liquid in your rain gauge and get the snow amount from that, or the other way around where you measure the snowfall and estimate how much water was there. We want you to make those measurements specifically and go out there and do it. And if you're not making the measurement, then you would just leave it blank. So if you don't feel like the snow in your 4-inch rain gauge was an accurate representation of what you have on your snowboard, then you can go out there and on your snowboard and you can do a snow core of that. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. But again, I just want to reiterate that 99% of the time you will just do your liquid equivalent from your 4-inch rain gauge and not from your snowboard. The one time you may want to consider this is, say maybe you forgot to take your funnel and inner tube out, and all the snow that fell didn't end up going in your rain gauge or something like that, or whatever, something happened where your rain gauge got blocked, and you don't feel like what you have in the rain gauge is accurate, then you can do what we're going to talk about here in the next few steps. So this is another time frame where you can use that snow swatter. So what you're going to do is you're going to go out to that snowboard where you just measured the snow, and you're going to take your 4-inch rain gauge and you're going to put it into the snow, and then you're going to get something sturdy like your snow swatter or spatula and put it under there and try and capture all the snow that is in that round area that you just measured out. And just like how we did before, you would go and melt that snow and then get that measurement of the total liquid, again right here, that 0.59 inches that you can see on the right. And you would put that in on the liquid equivalent area. And again, I'll show you an example here in a bit of exactly where all those go. The third measurement that you would do for snowfall is we do the total depth of snow, of new snow and old snow at your observation time. So this one again is a little bit different because this is the snow measurement that you always do at your observation time. You remember from step 1 when I told you the depth of new snow, we typically measure that whenever the snow ends, if possible. The total snow depth is always done at your observation time. So again, to reiterate, the snow depth is the average depth of snow that remains on the ground at your observation time. This is a little bit more of an imperfect measurement again because often your snow depth varies depending on where you look in the yard. So the idea is you try and find a few areas that are representative. So this time you're going to do more than just one measurement. You're going to do, sometimes if you can do 2 to 3 or more, obviously the more the better. You just want to do an average total, average amount of the total snow on the ground. Again, you don't want to find a spot where someone had shoveled snow. Obviously that's not going to be very accurate. You don't want to do it under a tree or somewhere along those lines. It's not going to be a representative amount of snow. So again, snow is rarely uniform, so take several measurements. And because this is, a more approximate snow measurement, we don't do this to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. We do this measurement to the nearest 1/2 inch. So you have 4.5 inches or 5 inches. Now, a lot of people ask us these questions. Well, what do we do if part of my yard has snow and part of my yard doesn't have snow, part of my yard has a lot of snow and parts don't have snow? So hopefully we'll give a couple examples here that may help explain, what you would be putting in. So our first example, say if half the ground has 2 inches of snow and half the ground has no snow at all. Well, in this case, you just take that as an average. So you take, 2 and then the 0, and you would average that together, you get 1 inch for your total depth. Now say for an example, you have more than half of your yard has no snow. In this case, then it wouldn't matter how much snow you had in the areas that were not bare. So say you even had like 5 inches in some spots, but if more than half of your yard has no snow, you would report that as a trace. And you can always mention your range of depth in your comments. Again, your comments are anything you want to add in addition to your measurement. And sometimes it can be kind of difficult to figure out exactly, how to make this measurement because let's say for an example, your house is kind of blocking the sun a little bit and that prevents melting from some spots. So that's again why you want to be thinking about what is a good representative area to measure your snow depth. You don't want to capture, a snow drift or an area where, the sun hasn't been shining on it at all versus everywhere else has, the sun has been shining on it and it's mostly or completely melted. Now that total snow depth is going to go right here on our total snow depth and ice on the ground at observation time. Again, that third measurement down in our snow section. The last measurement that we do is the snow water equivalent of the total snow on the ground. So again, this measurement is based on our snow depth, which we just talked about right now. So snow water equivalency is not something that we ask you to measure on a daily basis. And for many of you, it's not something that you'll really measure very often at all. The snow water equivalent is really going to be kind of tailored more towards the observers that are up in northern Indiana in areas that, typically they have snow on the ground for long periods of time. Much of Indiana, especially the southern and central portions of the state, our snow that falls typically doesn't last very long. Usually it's going to be all gone by the next time we get our next snow event. But for the folks up in northern Indiana, especially along the areas that get a lot of lake effect, the snow events can kind of pile up event after event after event, and you actually build what we call kind of that snow pack to a degree. So what we want to do is every so often, ideally on a Mondays, because that's, we try and be as consistent as possible, is we want to figure out how much is the liquid in the snow on the ground. So it's essentially, the same like we'll talk about. It's the same thing as we were talking about before with the snow core from the snowboard, except this case it's again coming from your snow depth. So to reiterate again, that snow water equivalent typically is going to be done once a week if you can, but again, it's an optional measurement, and it provides an idea for how much water is on the ground, which is very important for hydrologists as they get towards the end of the winter season and they need to start thinking about how much water is going to be running into the rivers and streams once all of this melts. So like I was saying before, this is a core sample from the snow on the ground and not your snowboard, because you want to capture the total snow. You're going to melt the core, the snow core, just like you do with any of the other snow measurements that we've talked about. And we want to know how much water is in that ice or that core of snow. So again, trying to find that representative location sometimes can be the hardest aspect. Trying to figure out an area where, there hasn't been too much melting, there hasn't been too much drifting, there hasn't been somebody's snowblower blowing on it. Again, you just try and do the best you can. That's imperfect, unfortunately, and difficult sometimes to come up with an answer. But if you're ever confused and, would like some advice, you can send us, any of us, an email of, hey, this is what my yard looks like. Where do you think would be some good spots to measure? So like we were talking about before, you take your 4-inch rain gauge, turn it upside down, clear the snow around it, and try and capture as much from that, round area that the 4-inch rain gauge sat down, and put as much snow in there as possible. Again, you're never going to be able to capture all the snow that was in that one spot, but you just do the best you can. So taking that, spatula or something else, you can kind of help sometimes to get as much as you can by, you sliding that spatula underneath your rain gauge, lifting it up, and then flipping it over, and then picking up any additional stuff that you may have missed. And just like all of the other snow water equivalent reports, you'd melt that you just measured, and you report it on your daily form down here at the bottom. So again, this is the melted value to the nearest hundredths of an inch, just like you would do for your rainfall. But again, this is coming from your total snow and ice on the ground at your observation time. So now that I've talked a lot about all of these different snow measurements and how to measure, we'll take a few seconds to stop and see if anybody had any questions about what we've covered so far. Beth, did we have any questions about snowfall that we can answer before we move on to some of the other aspects?
Yes, there is a question of if you can put the snowboard on your patio table or use your patio table as a snowboard.
That could potentially be an option, but one problem that I could see with using your patio table as your snowboard is it's probably going to be pretty close to your house. So you could end up having snow that either falls off, comes off the roof of your house or is blocked by your house, depending on what direction the wind is. So again, it's an option, but it's probably not the best option.
Okay, there's a question. You had talked about trying to melt the snow that you've collected in the outer cylinder by pouring warm water in. Can you just put warm water into an inner tube and then insert that inner tube into the gauge so you don't have to do all the math?
Yeah, that would certainly be an option, but it's going to take a little bit longer to melt. So I guess it comes down to how much time you have to make that measurement. If you're going to be home for an hour or so, then yeah, that'd be great, because then you wouldn't have to worry about doing the math. Then you have to worry about pouring everything, and that would be faster than just leaving the snow in your gauge to just sit out in your house.
And you mentioned it'd be great to have a snow ruler, if you will, that measures in tenths of an inch as opposed to your, say, hardware ruler that does eighth of an inch. Where can you find snow rulers that do tenths of an inch?
Yeah, so if you bought your rain gauge, a lot of people buy it from Weather Your Way. We have that linked in the email that we sent you when you first joined, but they do sell rulers to the nearest tenth of an inch. Outside of that, when it comes to stores, I'm not sure off the top of my head if there are stores out there that sell that, but I know for sure you can find them at the Weather Your Way store.
Okay. And we just had a new question come in. Do we wait for the snow to stop before sending our report? And what if we have 2 snowstorms in one day?
All right, so when it comes to 2 snowstorms in one day, if you know it's going to snow again, then you can just wait until the second snow finishes before you go out there and measure the new snow. But as it goes, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to know. So you can always go out there once and measure, and then if it snows again, you would measure again the second time, and you would use the higher of the two amounts when it comes to that. Now, as for when to report, you're still going to report at your normal time in the morning, but we do have, as I'm going to talk about later, a way to give us the information, say a lot of snow fell in a short amount of time. There's a special form that you can fill out for that snowfall to get that to us before you would send us, your morning report. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that here in a bit.
Okay, and then the only other thing that I was going to throw out, because the math and the melting and all of that stresses me out, is it is possible to actually weigh the snow if you have like a scale, like a kitchen scale. I didn't know if you wanted to go into that. If you guys want to check out articles, this was an article in our January newsletter of the Hoosier Observer, so I think you can find archived newsletters there. But essentially, if you email your outer gauge that's completely empty, and then when you have snow in it, you measure that, you can figure then what is just the weight of the snow in grams. And then if you divide that weight of just the snow by 201, that should give you the water inches, or if you will, the amount in rain. But I know it's a little kind of complicated to try and explain over the phone. So if you guys want to learn more about that, certainly drop me or Andrew an email, or I'll certainly try and repost that article in an upcoming newsletter.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to put that one back in, because that's can definitely be quick and easy if you need to get a quick measurement done.
Hi, Andrew. Yes, we have had a couple come in. And again, for those listening in, if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the Q&A box of this WebEx service. So the first question, Andrew, was about the snowboard. Assuming that the snowboard needs to be level, can it be set up above the ground to make sure that it's not sloping, or does it have to rest entirely on the ground?
That's a good question. Ideally, I think you'd want it to be, close to the ground, if not on the ground. I'm trying to think of an example where that would be a good instance to get it above the ground, because sometimes if you have any wind at all, if it's above the ground, then the wind could start, blow on the snow and blow it off of the snowboard. So I'd say ideally I'd put it on the ground, but I'm trying to think of a situation where it may be good to put it above the ground, and off the top of my head, I can't think of one.
Yeah, because you would think if air's even getting underneath the snowboard, it could contribute to some melting and some additional like air blowing things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if it gets above freezing, then you have freezing or melting coming from above and below.
So related to that, though, if you have a snowboard and you have it on the ground, won't that snowboard damage your lawn?
Typically, what you're going to be doing every time you measure your snowboard, or every time you measure the snow, you're going to be moving your board anyway. So unless you have your snowboard sitting out there for months at a time, you're not going to see really impacts to your lawn, especially if you're moving it each time you catch that snowfall. It's not going to be any different than the snow kind of being on the ground covering your lawn.
Yeah, and you probably don't need that snowboard out unless you know a snow event is coming, right?
Exactly. There are some people that leave their board out all year, but I know I bring mine in, especially if I'm not expecting snow for a while. Like, either set it aside or something like that, just so it doesn't get stepped on or something like that.
All right, here's a good question is, what if the snow is falling at your normal observation time? Because it hasn't quite peaked yet, the storm hasn't ended. So what do you do at the observation time? And do you just measure and clear the board and start all over?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually exactly what you would do. So it's similar to how you would have a measure during your normal measured time, and it's raining. So it's just like that. You go out there and you would measure your total snow that is on your snowboard, and you would clear your snowboard. So say it was 2 inches of snow had fallen, it's still snowing. You would take your snowboard measurement of 2 inches, you clear your board and put it on top of the snow. You go out and you measure your rainfall, or measure the snow that was in your rain gauge, just like you would. And then that's a good spot where your comment section come into play and say, hey, it's still snowing at the observation time. So then what you would do is once the snow stops, so say you measured everything at 7 o'clock and the snow stopped at 10 o'clock, then if you're around, then you can go out there and make that second measurement to get the total snow for the 2-day event, but obviously, you do the best you can when it comes to measuring the snow and when you can do it.
Great. Then the next question is, what do you do when you know it's snowing, you can see the snowflakes, but nothing really accumulates?
So we cover that one here in a bit in our frequently asked questions, but in that case, you'll enter that as a trace of snowfall.
Okay, and I don't see any more questions, so I guess you can keep going on. Again, if people still want to ask questions about snow, go ahead and do it, and we'll just catch it at the end.
Yep, so yeah, we'll stop here in a bit, but again, if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, we'll answer those the next time we take a break. So now that we've talked about snow, we're going to briefly talk about ice. Ice is the bane of a lot of people's existence in the winter. Snow is one thing, but nobody likes ice. So ice accretion, essentially, by definition, is when you have rain or drizzle. So you have a liquid precipitation that falls and freezes when it lands. So again, freezing rain, freezing drizzle are typically the two terms that we talk about when it comes to that. So there's a lot of people that they wonder, all right, how do we handle ice? How do we handle the what we call accretion of ice, or the accumulation of ice on things when it comes to CoCoRaHS? So the best way that we found to handle this situation is to find a small twig or some kind of branch, and you can break it off, and then you can measure it using your ruler in sections of 1/10 of an inch, essentially. But again, this sometimes be kind of difficult to measure and get an exact measurement. So there's a couple different examples that we'll show here of what that measurement looks like and how to do it. So again, ideally you have your CoCoRaHS snow ruler that is in 1/10 of an inch, but if you have a regular ruler, then there's the conversions of what an 1/8 of an inch, a 1/16 of an inch would go. We have kind of a couple of those quick listed there, but again, it's just you'll round to the nearest 1/10 of an inch when it comes to any ice. So here's an example of what that potentially would look like. So we have an example here where somebody broke off a little twig, and then they have their ruler, and then in this case they didn't have that ruler to the 1/10 of an inch. They have the ruler that is in 1/16 of an inch. So what we would do in this case is we're going to measure the ice accumulation on each side of the stick without measuring the width of the stick. So for an example, on our left side of the stick, we have a total of 5/16 of an inch, or no, sorry, 7/16 of an inch on the left side. And on the right side, we have a measurement of 3/16 of an inch. So now what we take is we take those two measurements and we add them together, so we get 10/16. And we would divide that by 2 to get the average of the two on each side. So in this case, it would be 5/16 of an inch of snow, or sorry, excuse me, of ice accumulation on the branch. Now, when you convert that to the nearest 1/10 of an inch, then you get 0.3 inches. Again, this is a very difficult measurement to do. So you just really, all we can ask is you do the best you can. As you can see on the stick, even if you go up and down a little bit, you can get a different measurement depending on where you're measuring sometimes. Another thing you can use if you have some kind of post that's sticking out there, or sometimes people will measure like off their fence or like a some kind of surface. Again, you just do the best you can. Sometimes measuring in a couple different types of surface can help you get an average. But again, when it comes to if you're measuring something on top of something, it would not be an average. It would just be a total thickness of that ice. So in this example, again, it's a 1/2 inch when you go out there and measure it. So what do you do with that ice? Well, or that ice accumulation. In the normal precipitation report form for CoCoRaHS, there isn't a spot for accumulation or freezing rain accumulation. So what we ask you to do is to put those in those observation notes. Again, especially after an ice event, at the National Weather Service, we definitely will be going through those observation notes to see if we can find reports of those. But other agencies and other groups of people also know that, especially when it comes to ice, that's where we're going to be able to find that information. So does anybody have any questions about ice? I want to stop really quick because ice, again, is it's not an easy measurement to do, and it can sometimes trip people up. So if anybody has any questions about ice, we'll go ahead and answer those really quick before we move on.
At this time, I don't see any ice questions submitted.
Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on again. Any questions, just let us know. So now we're going to dive into some of these, frequently asked questions, special situations, what ifs that you may have now that we can answer now. But again, if you have any questions or anything pops up when it comes to an event that you don't know the answer to, just send us an email and we'd be glad to help you out and put you on the right track with these difficult situations. Because like I said, winter precipitation, it's difficult, and a lot of the times we may not have the right answer or the best answer. We just have to do, the best we can do and kind of go from there. So like I was talking about earlier, what if you have a heavy snow event that you want people to know how much snow fell up to this point? So let's say you go out there, it's been snowing since 8 a.m. It's finally stopped snowing now and it's 3 p.m. and there's been 10 inches of snow that fell or some large amount. And you want to be able to get that information to the National Weather Service or other organizations quickly, essentially in real time, but without waiting, till the next morning when you do your normal observation. So the way you would do that is the significant weather report. And this is on the left-hand panel, just right next to your normal precipitation report form. But essentially what this form is any way to send us something that's significant in real time. So whether that's a heavy rain event or heavy snow event that occurs in between your normal observation time. So quickly kind of talk about this. There's been a couple newsletters I know that we've at least brought up the significant weather report. So there's some kind of documentation that you can go back in your email and look at. But just very quickly, again, you would choose your observation date and your observation time that you made that measurement, the duration that the report covers. So again, for an example, say it was snowing from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m., that'd be a total of 8 hours. If you measured the melted snow during that time, great. Or, if not, generally, if you're going to be doing something like this, you just want to let us know the snow. You're not going to have that melted amount up to that point. The key is, right down here where we have our depth of new snow and depth of total snow, that's going to be the most important information essentially to put in for the significant weather report aspect, at least. And then, especially if you're doing significant weather report, is those observation notes can be really helpful for us. So like an example here, the observer's talking about whiteout conditions. So what that lets us know at the Weather Service is not only how much snow fell in that short amount of time, but also that conditions are pretty dangerous out there, that those whiteout conditions and people can't see. So again, right here the observer also says snow continues to fall, and if conditions continue, we'll file another report. And then in this case, they put a time of when they would do that. But again, you do the best you can. Let us know what you know when you know it, essentially. It helps us paint a fuller picture of what's going on, essentially. So like the question that we had earlier, what do we do if we have snow that melts as it lands but never actually accumulates at any time? So what we would do is we would report that precipitation to the gauge that melted. So whether that is, just a trace if it was only a few snowflakes, or sometimes, especially if we get an early season or late season event, we can have quite a bit of snow that falls, but the ground is just too warm and it never actually accumulates. So you can get, several hundredths of an inch of precipitation, but no snow. So in that case, again, you'd report your precipitation, melt amount as your daily precipitation. You would report a trace of new snow, but your snow depth in that case would be 0, because when you went out and measured your snow, there was no snow on the ground. So again, your snow depth is 0. Your new snowfall would be a trace. And then, we always recommend, hey, in your comments, write snow melted as it landed. Again, just so if anybody's ever looking back and like, well, I have a trace of snow, but no snow on the ground, makes it pretty easy for people to figure out why that is. We get a lot of people that ask us the question of, well, what do I do if I don't have time to melt my snow core before I have to leave for work or school? So you can actually go in there and you can make your snowfall measurement. So you can go out there and write down how much snow actually fell and the snow on the ground, but not enter the melted amount until later. So in this case, if you were to do this, what you'd do is you'd fill out your snowfall and snow depth, like I just said, but under the top area where you have the rain and melted snow to the nearest hundredths of an inch, you would write the letters NA. Essentially, that just means that there was no measurement done. But what you can do is when you come back home, or whenever you get a chance to measure that amount, then you can go back in and you can edit that precipitation report, and you can put that amount that was melted again at that time. If you have any questions about how to edit a precipitation report form, or say you accidentally make a mistake, you want to go back and edit it, if you don't know how to do it, you can let us know, and we'd be happy to walk you through the process of changing one of your precipitation reports. But in general, it's not really too difficult to do. But like I was saying before, those observation notes are very helpful. For us, if we're looking at the report and we're like, oh, they didn't measure the total amount of rain, we see that and you're like, oh, okay, well, we'll expect to see it later. So now I'm going to just kind of sum everything up really quick, and hopefully in a way that is easy to understand, that you can remember when it comes to actually the precipitation report form and what goes in each one. So our first measurement up here at the top is our melted amount that is in our rain gauge. So this is what it was in your 4-inch rain gauge that you melted and put in. The next one coming down here is our new snowfall. So this is the snowfall that fell in the last 24 hours or whenever the measurement was that you did on your snowboard. So this is the snowboard measurement, and it's to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. The next one down is, again, this is your 1% time frame where you accidentally forget to leave your funnel out. Say you measured the snowfall or the rain and melted snow from your snow core, then you would put it in this second box. Now again, 99% of the time, you're not going to be measuring your snow core from your snowfall on your snowboard, so you would leave that in A. So again, not applicable is what it's going to by default say, and you're going to leave it unless you actually measure your snowfall from, or your core from your snowboard. Hopefully that makes sense. This is the one thing that trips people up the most, it seems like, is this box right here. A lot of people, like you can see in the example here, they just put the same one in both. Again, you only would fill this box out if you measured from the snowboard. Next box down, this is our total snow on the ground. So this is our new snow plus our old snow. And this is measured out in your yard or wherever else. This is not from the snowboard. And this is, the several measurements, and it's the average of that. So that's why, again, it's to the nearest 1/2 of an inch versus the nearest 1/10 of an inch above. And then the last box down here is our melted core from our snow depth. And again, this is the one thing that we recommend if you can do it once a week. If you have a significant amount of snow that's been on the ground for 3 to 5 days or a week or several weeks, just gives us an idea of how much water is in that snow. Now, for those of you that use the CoCoRaHS app, I have the same thing here, but in the app version. Again, this is an Android version of the app. For those of you that use Apple, unfortunately, I don't have an Apple device, so I was not able to take some screenshots of what it looks like, but I'm assuming it would look similar. But again, the same thing, just like how it was before. The top thing is very similar to where we were right here, where we have our new snow. So this is our total snow from our snowboard. The next one down is our snow core from the snowboard, again, the one that you're going to leave blank 99% of the time. The next one down is our total snow on the ground, so our snow depth, again, the one that we measure out in our yard. And then the fourth box, just like how we were saying before, is our total water equivalent from our snow core that you do once a week. And then this is the page you're probably most familiar with. Again, this is more like the top section from our website, but this one again just has your observation date, your observation time, and then the melted amount of rain or snow. But when you do have snow to put in, you would click that box. And then the third one here is your comment section. So any comments that you would put in your report on the website, this is where it would go on the mobile version. One last thing, we always like to push, you get your monthly email from Beth asking you to put in your rainfall zeros, especially in the winter season, we like to see those snowfall zeros too. So if you don't have any snowfall, this is once we get into the November, December timeframe, we're in more of the snow season. we'd like to see those zeros when you with your snowfall, because again, that information is helpful for us because we know, all right, we know that there was no snowfall that fell versus, well, they reported some precipitation, so say there was like 1/10 of an inch here, but we don't know if it was snow or if it was only rain, if it has NA in all of these 4 boxes. So again, if you tell us that it's a 0.0, then we know for sure that it was no snow. Another thing that's helpful for us is even if there's no snow, sometimes that snow depth will change. So say it's 2 days after a snow and 3 days, 4 days after that snowfall, that snow depth is going to change over time. Generally we're going to see those numbers go down. So even if you didn't have any new snow, put in those zeros for the snowfall and then update us with whatever snow depth there could be. So now that we kind of are nearing the end of this, does anybody have any questions as we wrap up?
All right, Andrew. So there's a follow-up question concerning the snowboard. Is there a recommended thickness to the snowboard?
I wouldn't say so, but any kind of, if you're using wood, any kind of piece of wood's probably going to be fine. Anything more probably than a 1/16 of an inch, just something that's going to be sturdy, that when you pick it up, you don't want it to be fall apart on you. But no, I wouldn't say there's any specific requirement.
Yeah, just as long as it stays flat and doesn't warp, I guess, with the moisture.
Yeah, definitely that. You wouldn't want it to warp around.
And then how do you handle the snow measurements, all 4 of those that you went through, if you've been out of town for a while?
So, when it comes to that, we have the multi-day report that you've used probably if you've been out of town for a while, but probably the only thing you're going to be able to put in for it when it comes to snowfall on your multi-day report would be your snow depth. I can pull it up on this other screen just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is when you try and do a multi-day report. Let's see. Yep, so your multi-day report is only going to include your total snow depth on the ground of that measurement time. And then there's also a box to put the snow core if you do measure that.
Okay. And you had mentioned that for the snowfall information, only about 1% of the time would you ever need to do the core and melt that down, because you could just take it straight out of your 4-inch gauge. But if you're like a real go-getter and have a lot of time on your hand, is it a big deal if you did the snow core every time it snowed?
There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. The reason we just say that is because for most people, it's kind of a hassle to go out there and measure the snow core from their snowboard each time. But, if you do measure that, those would be, like I have it here, that they would be generally going to be slightly different numbers. So yeah, if you want to go out there and measure your snow core and melt that down every day, it's good information. We just want people to understand that there is a difference between these 2 boxes, and that we don't want people just kind of plugging in that number every time, because it's something we see happen a lot in the winter, and then that kind of causes problems with our data quality as well. People aren't actually measuring it, they're just copying it over. So again, if you're going to do it, we just want you to do it correctly. But yeah, that sounds great to have somebody, if you have the time you want to do it, yeah, go for it.
And then there's a request for you to go back to the front screen of your Android so that they can take a picture.
Yes, right here. I think this is the one. So this is when you log into your Android app. This is the screen that would normally pop up. And then the first screen that I showed you is actually what the snow, when you click to specify snow and flooding, that's what it looks like.
Great. And I don't see any other questions, but we do have a few more minutes. So if anyone is listening in and has a question, feel free to type it in the Q&A box.
All right, so I'll go ahead and bring it back to the email screen. If you do still need that picture and you didn't get a chance, let us know and we'll go back to that screen. But otherwise, I just wanted to have the email up for the 4 state coordinators for Indiana. Like I mentioned before, we have Beth Hall up at Purdue, and then Andrew and Casey at the Indianapolis office, and then Kyle's up at the Northern Indiana. We are your 4 coordinators. You can reach out to any of us with any questions you have. Whether it's related to a specific observation, or sometimes, if you just want to chat about something related to CoCoRaHS or anything else, we love to hear your comments and know you're out there, because, we want to make this as personal of a relationship as we can when it comes to this. We don't want to just kind of be the people that are out there occasionally sending you a newsletter. We want to have an open conversation.
Yes, and certainly if you have a question, you're probably not the only one who has a question. So if you email us, then we could probably even put it as an article in the next newsletter, send out a special issue. So there are a couple more questions that have come in, Andrew. One is remind us the website again to order the gauge and the snow stick.
Yes, so if you go back to your email that we sent you when you first joined, whether you're the typical one that we've been doing, the ambient weather right now, they haven't had the CoCoRaHS equipment in stock as frequently, so we'd recommend weather your way. And I guess I can pull it up over here and see if I can drag it across the screen and see if you can find it.
It's put the Weather Your Way link in the Q&A box, but it's also an icon on the home page of CoCoRaHS. So if you go to the CoCoRaHS.org website, you'll see an icon for it.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, you just follow that link and the different gauges and parts are right there.
Another question, is there a way to download the screen info, etc., from this webinar?
Well, I'm sorry, what information were you trying to get?
Is there a way to download the screen info, etc., from this webinar? So certainly, any slide from this, but I'm guessing it's the slides where you kind of annotate what's supposed to go in each box of the form field.
Well, what we can do is in the next newsletter, maybe we can have our summary page. So this one right here, we can have that included in there as that review as part of that. And then for sure, we'll have the presentation available via the YouTube link that you could be able to watch it and review anything. But maybe we'll plan on having something like that in the newsletter, just as a quick review for those of you that you may have forgotten some details from this.
Yeah, it certainly is a lot to take in and a bit overwhelming. I know for me, when the winter starts, I'm like trying to figure out, is it 1/100 of an inch? Is it 1/10 of an inch? Is it a 1/2 of an inch? And when do I do it? And so forth. So we'll try and get that as an article in an upcoming newsletter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to talk about it. It's different to actually go out there and make the measurement when it's 7 a.m. It's dark outside and it's snowing and all that fun. So yeah.
If it's cold and blowing,
yes,
and you're trying to figure out why you signed up for this whole thing in the first place. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. But again, Andrew has put up our contact information, so feel free to email us. And if you receive the newsletters, we try and keep our contact information there. Additionally, if you're looking for shorter videos, training videos, on the main CoCoRaHS.org website, bottom left, I think, is a training session. And they have some cute little animation videos that are maybe 5 minutes long that hone in on a particular topic. So if you're like, I just can't remember how to do snow depth, there might be a short, quick video that's cute with that. But this was an opportunity for us to try and talk to you directly as Indiana CoCoRaHS observers and give you an opportunity to ask questions. So with that, is there any final words, Andrew, that you want to say, or Hans, you want to say?
Got a message from Kyle. So Kyle's been on the webinar today. He just wanted to let us know that he was around and appreciated everything. So yep, Kyle was here. I don't know if we can unmute him if he has anything to say, but he was around. And yeah, again, we just want to thank everybody for being a part of this webinar and listening in, because I know for me at least, winter precipitation, it's difficult, and so we just want to thank you again for taking the time to join us to learn a little bit more about it.
I have one question that was sent to me, which is, what should we do if the snow melts on contact for the first couple of hours and sticks afterwards?
That's a good question. So in that case, what you would have is your snow that is in your rain gauge is going to be counted essentially when it comes to the melted amount. But then when you go out and you do your snow measurement, obviously it's going to be a lower amount. So when you go out to your snowboard, that number may be a lot lower compared to the amount of liquid in your rain gauge. But you would go out and measure it just like you normally would. You go out and take your your snow stick and you go out there and put it in on the snowboard and get your measurement, and it would be just like any other thing, any other measurement you would do.
Andrew, is there a time, like a date in your earlier slide, you said that when winter season is going on, we love the zeros. So are you saying like maybe from November 1st through April 1st, we just try and get in the habit of entering in our snowfall, snow depth zeros, or should we wait till the first snow event and start creating that habit?
Yeah, I would say, once we get into the first snow, putting in those zeros is helpful. Especially, the zeros are really, really good too. Like I was saying, when there's snow on the ground but no snow is falling, so we know that no new snow fell as your snow depth is decreasing over time, essentially. But I would say, yeah, anytime you want to. I mean, there's nothing that stops you from even in the middle of summer putting in those zeros for snowfall and snow depth. I mean, obviously it's not necessary, but it's still good information, especially for somebody that is looking at longer term. You're looking at the data kind of over longer term, or situations where you may have a really late season snow. It's hard to tell. Hey, was there actually no snow, or did they just not measure it? We have the observers. Some of the observers that we use in the National Weather Service are called cooperative observers, and we ask them to put their zeros in year round. But obviously, just do the best you can. There's no requirement for any of this, but we'd like to see the zeros when you can.
Great. Anyone else have any questions?
We've had a couple come into the Q&A. One is, if we have questions later after we start measuring, is there someone we can contact?
Yeah, so the slide right here up here are your Indiana state coordinators. You can email any of us or your local coordinators. If you go to the CoCoRaHS website, some counties here in Indiana actually have a local coordinator that are just handle a certain county, like Hans. So if you can email your local coordinator, or you'd be happy to email any of us, and we'd be glad to answer your questions. If you want the most timely response, you can email all four of us, and usually one of us can get back to you, hopefully within 24 hours.
Great. The other one, if you're a National Weather Service severe weather spotter, should you include CoCoRaHS data for ice, snow, or other winter conditions?
I'm sorry, can you say that question again?
Okay, so if you're a severe weather spotter, should you include CoCoRaHS data for ice, snow, and other winter conditions in your reports?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Obviously, especially when we're trying to figure out ice and snow events after the fact, you can put that with the rest of your report that you're sending us. Absolutely. All right. Do we have any other questions or any other comments from anybody?
There was one of, can we refer back to these slides? So we know that this webinar itself is being recorded. Will just the slide deck be made available?
I mean, I think we could do that. A lot of this, actually, this presentation comes from the CoCoRaHS website. So, if you earlier, Beth sent out a link to some training things. So this presentation, to some degree, is on that website. But yeah, we can make the slide deck available. I don't see any reason why we couldn't, especially some of the key slides that kind of sum everything up. All right, well, we're getting close to 7 o'clock here. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody for listening in on this, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about winter reporting, whether you're a first-time CoCoRaHS observer and this is your first year, or if you've been doing this for a long time, just getting a refresher. So again, all of our contact information is right there. And with that, I'll probably send it back to either Beth or Hans to wrap things up.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. That was a great presentation. I think it's good to have that review, and hopefully we'll do this more regularly. Certainly any questions, let us know. I'll try and put some additional helpful hints in the newsletter coming up. If there are particular topics that you think would be good to be addressed in an article, that's also good to help give us ideas. Hans, are there any final words that you want to say?
We did get one last question about if a 10-year-old can participate. And I believe the answer to that is yes. A little adult supervision would be nice, and 10-year-olds generally don't own their own land. So, there are some barriers, but we certainly encourage youth participation as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's always good to go out there and, get to experience science in action.
Indeed. I see another question came up. How do I get on the newsletter? I hope that everyone who is a CoCoRaHS observer is on the newsletter. So if you haven't been getting the newsletter, drop me an email and I'll double check my email list to make sure that you're on it.
I don't know, Sam, if you're still around there, if you had any other comments or things to add as we wrap up.
I'm still here. You did a fantastic job. Great questions by everybody, and we look forward to everybody's reports this winter. Very good job.
Stay safe. If it looks like the conditions are bad out there, put your safety first, please.
Yeah, absolutely. The report can wait.